Good morning and welcome to today's seminar. My name is Alex Kurz and I'm going to talk about the Eperi Gateway and Salesforce today. I have also with me my colleague Georg Gütschow, who is going to take care of the questions at the end of the meetings. So talking about those questions, this seminar is in listen-only mode, meaning you unfortunately can't interact directly with me during the presentation. So please, if you have any questions, use the webinar's question facility. Right, so this webinar is actually the fourth part of a series of online seminars that we've ran over the last couple of weeks. So 3 of the 4 seminars already happened and also have been recorded and are available from our website. So if you are interested in any of the other topics, like Georg's presentation on Microsoft Teams, which is the absolute rage at the moment because of the Corona crisis and the need for online collaboration and so on, please have a look at that. I've also done another presentation on Microsoft 365, so how the Eperi Gateway protects Microsoft 365, the other solutions apart from Microsoft Teams. And our CEO and founder, Elmar, made a presentation on how we protect basically everything else, because the Eperi Gateway is able to protect any kind of data in the cloud, on-premise, whatever it is. And today, like I've already mentioned, I'm going to talk about the gateway in general and how it works together with Salesforce. Right, so let's start with the actual problem and why we do what we do. So first of all, it is pretty much impossible to guarantee that data is not stolen. So you can't do anything about that. It might get lost, it might get stolen at one point, but the Eperi Gateway makes sure that the data, if it gets lost, if it gets leaked, stolen, whatever, is not usable for the attacker, for whoever gets hold of the data. Because when you steal the data, you only get encrypted data that is basically useless. So how do we do that? We eliminate those problems of data theft by anonymizing or pseudonymizing critical data before it actually gets written into the cloud. I'm going to get to that in detail a bit later in this demonstration. We apply the best of breed, toughest data security standards, encryption algorithms, tokenization mechanisms, and well, basically the most sophisticated protection mechanisms that are available in the market. While, and that is also very, very important, while preserving cloud functionality like search and sort in Salesforce and all those things that people just expect from a cloud solution. So what we are doing here is we are actually partly transforming weaknesses into strengths. If you look at certain roles in companies, for example, the CISOs, the data privacy officers, or the workers' councils, which are, so let's face it, always seen as kind of the killjoys that always tell you that you can't do this, you can't go to the cloud because of data security, and so on and so on. So with our solution, a CISO or a data privacy officer can actually become an enabler instead of the constant blocker. So a CISO can say, okay, you want to use Salesforce, you want to use Office 365, that's absolutely fine. As long as we are encrypting the data before it goes into the cloud, as we can do with the Eperi Gateway, everything is good and you can use that solution. From a management perspective, of course, having no unencrypted data in the cloud means they can sleep better at night, because the legal liability is lifted from them, because there is no data that can be stolen, and they don't need to be concerned about turning up as a headline in the newspapers when they get up in the morning. And for the line of business, for the people actually doing the work, it means that they now have the freedom to use best of breed IT solutions in the cloud instead of being forced to go on using old-fashioned on-premise solutions. So that's the reason why we actually do what we are doing and who we help with that. So how do we do that? The Eperi gateway, as the name suggests, is actually a gateway that sits right in the data stream between the users and the cloud application. And like I've already mentioned, it really doesn't matter which cloud application that is. So today is going to be about Salesforce, but Office 365 I've mentioned already, but we also do things like ServiceNow or SuccessFactors. And that little green cloud here shows we can do pretty much everything else as well. Like I said, Elmar already did a demo on that. Have a look at that if you are interested in anything that is not directly covered by one of our demos. So the gateway, like I said, sits in the data stream, typically very close to the actual users, to the customer, meaning that in larger environment, you normally find the Eperi gateway or the gateways, because of course they can be clustered and everything. You find them on-premise in the customer's own data centers. But then smaller or medium-sized customers may actually come back to that idea on hosting a gateway locally. They may come back saying, well, we are going into the cloud. We are doing that for a reason. We want to get rid of all that local stuff. In that case, you have the option of what we call the trusted partner approach. So in every country, at least in every country in Europe and in the US, we have partners that are experienced in hosting the Eperi gateway for their customers. So for example, in Germany, you can approach T-Systems and ask them to host the gateway for you. The difference between the actual cloud is that the cloud itself, that being Microsoft or Salesforce, normally sits somewhere outside of your country, outside of Germany, Switzerland, Austria, wherever you are, because these are American companies. And even if the machines physically are in the European Union, for example, they still belong to American companies, which means they apply to American laws like the Patriot Act, the Cloud Act, which may enforce those companies, Microsoft or Salesforce or whoever, to open up their data to American law enforcement agencies. With a partner like T-Systems, for example, you don't have that problem because the same laws apply to them as the laws that apply to you. So that is exactly the same. You are not confronted, or you don't need to deal with an American company. There are no laws that can force any German partner to hand out data to an American law enforcement agency or a Chinese agency or whatever, wherever that application comes from. So this is just a more trustworthy relationship than you would ever have with the cloud provider themselves, because of everybody knows T-Systems, everybody knows the local partners that we have, and like I said, the laws that apply are the same, and they cannot be forced to hand out the data. So there are no backdoors in there. But like I said, for larger environments and for absolute and best possible solution, it's also possible to host the Eperi gateway internally on customers' own premises. Right. Just to emphasize why we actually do that, and also to emphasize again that problem with American cloud providers. So as you probably know, cloud providers typically also offer some kind of encryption solution for their offers. So we're talking about Salesforce today. There's a solution called Salesforce Shield that supports very specific encryption algorithms, secure algorithms, and also functionalities like bring your own key, hold your own key, where that solution, Salesforce Shield, actually allows the customers to manage their own keys and make sure that data that is encrypted, once it is encrypted, cannot be accessed by Salesforce anymore, which is all true. And that's the level of encryption a cloud provider can actually go to. But there is, as you can see from the color coding here, there are green parts, of course, when the data is still local and your keys are managed local, that is all safe and secure. And after the data went through the encryption in Salesforce and is stored on Salesforce's systems, it's safe as well. So it's protected against theft. But there is one little hole in there, and that is the encryption process itself. So to allow Salesforce to encrypt your data, you actually have to give them your data first in readable form. And then they apply your keys and the encryption algorithms, and then create a secure data at rest. But theoretically, and this is, I'm not saying they do that, but this is how I would do it. If the NSA or the CIA or the FBI asks me to somehow get hold of that readable data, is during the encryption process, in a very brief moment, the data is there at Salesforce in the US, readable. And then you can, if you have to, fork this data off into a second database that the customer will never ever know of, and make that available to all those three-letter agencies in the US. So that is an attack vector that cannot possibly be closed with a cloud solution, a cloud encryption solution. What we do is we move this line, this security line, a bit to the right, and we actually take care of the encryption itself as well. So we not only allow the customer to handle the data, to control the keys, the customer now also controls the encryption itself, the encryption process. So before data is even written into the cloud, it's already encrypted, and we've got a full green line going to the cloud application and ending up in secure data at rest as well. And this obviously eliminates that forking mechanism to the NSA because this vector is just not there anymore, because obviously you wouldn't allow them to fork anything off. So that's the idea behind that. And this is the weakness of cloud applications encryption mechanisms, is the encryption mechanism or the encryption process itself. So at this point, enough about the theory and PowerPoints. Let's go into the product itself so that you actually see what the solution does for you. Right, this is not very spectacular, so be warned, it's not going to be very spectacular, but that's the idea behind it. What you see when you use the Eperi gateway for Salesforce is just a normal Salesforce at the end of the day. The only difference you see is that I'm actually not at Salesforce in reality. I am using a domain. My gateway sits in a domain that is called crm.eperidemo.net. Obviously, this is a demo environment for Eperi, and this is the only difference. From here, you can just work with your Salesforce just as you're used to. You can look into your accounts. You can look into your contacts, for example. You can go into contacts. You can watch details in there, and also most importantly, like I've promised before, functionalities in the cloud are still available and will still work, like search, for example. So I can do my full text search here. You can see that read ahead search works as well. And if I fire this search, you see that I find everything that has something to do with the word Wayne. This looks very simple, but actually isn't, because if you think about it, that search just happened or appeared to happen in the cloud. And in the cloud, there is no readable data. So it's actually much more difficult than it looks. But yeah, let me actually show you what it looks like, what we do, because I've got a second browser open or a second tab open where I'm logged into Salesforce directly now. So you can see this time I'm really at Salesforce. I'm using the exact same account, the exact same data, and I can even here already see that something has changed. Because here, the recent records, I can't read anything anymore. I only see tokens, I only see encrypted content. The same goes, of course, if I go to browse my accounts and if I go into my contacts. You can already see here that I've chosen to do something that we call selective encryption, because in 99.9% of the cases, it's not necessary to encrypt all data. What you have to encrypt and what you make sure is that your personally identifiable data is encrypted. So anything that helps an attacker to identify people, companies, and their data needs to be protected in some way. Things like the title, for example, I've decided to leave open in that case, because VPs or senior VPs of operations or whatever, there must be thousands or 10,000s of them on the planet. So it doesn't really help me to get that kind of information. So I decided to only protect what needs to be protected. And what you can also see is that we have different formats here. So for the account name, for example, I chose just standard encryption. So I just went and encrypted that value. You can see that because it starts with an EN underscore. Whereas for the name, first name and last name, I've chosen tokenization, a simple string tokenizer where I replace the original value with a replacement value, which is kind of interesting from a legal perspective, because encrypted data, which is the original data encrypted with a certain mathematical algorithm, still has a mathematical relationship to the original data. Sounds very complex, actually is very complex, but the message behind that and the reason why I'm telling you that is that in front of a court, you might actually hear something like, yeah, well, you weren't allowed to store that data in the cloud because even if it's encrypted, there is still a relationship to the original data that can be broken, that can be decrypted. So you're not allowed to do that. Whereas the only relation between a token and its original value is stored locally. There is no algorithm, no key or anything that allows anyone to kind of decrypt that value. You have to physically steal the token database from the customer to be able to reverse this kind of protection, which is typically called anonymization or pseudonymization. And those tokens can also be used, for example, to work with formatted fields like email addresses, because in Salesforce and other database-oriented applications, I can't just write an encrypted string that would look something like that into a field that expects an email address. You have to write something that goes along the lines of something at something dot something, an email address. So you can also set up tokenization to actually work in a format preserving way, so that what ends up in the database is accepted by the database, by the cloud application, and still represents a valid email address, a valid date, a valid zip code or something like that, whatever you need. So you're very, very flexible in terms of how and what you encrypt in Salesforce. And just quickly going into the actual administrator's console that we're using to set up encryption for Salesforce, because there's a very interesting fact in here. You can already see that I've got quite an extensive policy with encryption, tokenization, and all that kind of stuff in place. But an important thing to notice is that the Eperi gateway supports every Salesforce environment. That's important to mention because there aren't two environments that are exactly the same. They're all customized, they have custom fields and so on. And there are solutions in the market that actually support what is called standard fields in Salesforce. Basically meaning that if you add your own fields, they are not covered. With the Eperi gateway, they are, because what we do when we work on a policy is we actually tap into that Salesforce environment in real time. So what we see are the real objects and the real fields as they are in this specific Salesforce instance. And from here, you can select, for example, the account object, and you get live all the fields, custom fields, standard fields, everything you have pulled from that environment in real time. And in this case, you can see that most of the fields are already configured. But if I find out, for example, that I now need to encrypt the account number as well, because other than I thought before, it's actually stuff that needs to be encrypted, I can do that on the fly. And I can then choose whether I want to just encrypt this field or if I want to tokenize it. And if I want to tokenize, I can choose from out of the box tokenizers like this email tokenizer, which doesn't make a lot of sense with an account number. But anyways, I can choose the out of the box tokenizers, or I can choose tokenizers that I've created myself. So for example, this talk eperidemo.net is a tokenizer that I created for myself and that I'm routing for, that I'm using for email routing. So you can create your own tokenizers and set them up in any way you want, apply them to your data, save it, and from then on, this data will be protected in the way that you've defined. Right. Basically, that is it in a nutshell. So if we are talking about the Eperi gateway and what it does is, just remember, always remember that picture here. What we do is we take this human readable data and transform it to this. So this is all that Salesforce will ever get to see. They will not be able to hand over any data, any readable data apart from this over to any agency, to any law enforcement agency or whatever. So no unencrypted data will always will at any point end up with an American company or with an American law enforcement agency. And of course, if somebody manages to break into Salesforce, steal data, they will also be stuck with this encrypted data here and not be able to do anything with it. Right, so that's the idea behind our solutions. That's what we do with the data. And this actually also concludes my presentation, meaning that I'm actually through. And I thank you for your interest and for your time. And I hope you've asked plenty of questions, because I'm sure I forgot a lot of things during my presentation. So Georg, are there any questions?
Yes, Alex, thanks a lot for the deep dive around the Eperi protection and especially for our Salesforce solution. Actually, there are some questions which came up from the crowd here on the phone. So first question is, what happens with the data that is already in Salesforce? Will it be automatically encrypted when using Eperi?
Right. This is actually a question that comes up in pretty much every demo we ever give. And this is a very, very valid question. So what happens with the data that is already there? Because we don't see green field solutions anymore with no data in it. So there will always be data there. Will it be automatically encrypted from the moment on you put the Eperi gateway in place? No, it won't. But there are means and ways to get your existing data encrypted. For Salesforce specifically, there is a tool called the data loader that allows you to read data from Salesforce and store it locally and also push it back into Salesforce, typically used for data exports, for backup purposes, and all those things. So to do an initial encryption for Salesforce data, you would use the onboard tool, data loader from Salesforce, and just download the readable and unencrypted data directly from Salesforce to your local environment. And then you would use the data loader again to push the data up to Salesforce again, but this time you go through the gateway. So you basically push all your data through our encryption gateway, and the data then, all the data, also historic data, will end up in Salesforce encrypted. So that is the way into Salesforce with existing data. Very simple, very straightforward. And while I'm on it, I'm going to answer a question that hasn't been asked, and that is about the other way around. So should you at any given day decide that you don't want to encrypt anymore, or you need your data back because you want to transfer to another solution than Salesforce, or you don't need to use the Eperi gateway anymore, which of course never happens, but just theoretically. So the other way around is, how do I get that encrypted data out of Salesforce again? I mean, obviously, we are not malware. We are not ransomware. the encrypted data is your data. So as long as you have the keys and you have them in your database, in your key management, in your HSM hardware security module, you have those keys. As long as you have them, you can, of course, decrypt and detokenize your data. And that would work with Salesforce exactly the other way around. You would use the data loader. This time you would read the data from Salesforce through the gateway and end up with unencrypted data again on premise. And then you just push it back directly and you are back to square one and you have unencrypted data in Salesforce. So the way in and the way out in most of the applications that we support is actually the same. Right.
Perfect.
That's that.
Thank you for that. Next question, are there any plugins required on Salesforce side?
No, actually there aren't. And that is something we pride ourselves with, is that neither on the client side nor on the server or cloud side, we need any kind of plug-in application or extension or anything like that. So you don't need to install any Eperi stuff on your client or in Salesforce. The gateway sits in the data stream and it acts completely transparent. So neither the client nor the cloud application will actually realize that there is anything in between. The only thing is, obviously, if you look at the data in the cloud application, you will see that it looks funny because it has been encrypted. But there is no part necessary on the Salesforce side to actually enable that functionality for us. So we are independent from Salesforce or any plugins.
Perfect.
Right.
Next one, is your product also available as a service?
Well, yes, it is, but not from Eperi. So we don't offer the solution as a service for the simple reason that we are a software vendor. So we deliver software. That's what we do. But as I've already mentioned during the presentation, we have a lot of partners internationally. And those partners are sometimes they are even more experienced with large environments for millions of users than we are ourselves. And those partners in their respective countries offer those security as a service services that customers can sign up, and the gateways would be hosted, administered, and maintained by the partner. And for the customer, it's just a normal cloud service at any other, but on a completely different trust level. So the answer is yes, although not as Eperi ourselves, but through partners, we offer the solution as a service. Right.
Thanks. Yeah, and final question. I think you have answered it already within your presentation, but maybe briefly repeat. What is the advantage of Eperi in comparison to Salesforce Shield?
Yeah, it's right. I've answered that already, but I still have 2 minutes to go, and there's a lot to say about the difference between the two, and also whether they are kind of competitors or so. So just to answer that question directly again, the advantage is that with the Eperi gateway, you not only control the keys and the data, you also control the encryption process itself, because the encryption process requires that you have readable data that you can encrypt. You pull this out of the cloud and you take this locally and make sure that no data can actually be forked off into any other databases. But there's much more about Salesforce Shield, which is a good solution in itself. And one could think that Salesforce and we are actually in competition because we both offer an encryption solution. But as a matter of fact, we aren't. And we can even coexist. So our solution in Salesforce Shield can even coexist. If there are a couple of fields that should be encrypted but aren't that important, then you can use Salesforce Shield. So that's against theft and data loss. But personal data, important data, can be encrypted with Eperi. So that is one of the things we can do. And from a Salesforce perspective, we are actually not competition, because sometimes we are the ones who make it possible that certain companies with high security and safety requirements can actually use a cloud application, because sometimes companies would really like to use Salesforce, but they can't. They can't because of that one hole that may allow data to go to American agencies. And this is when Eperi comes in as a deal enabler for Salesforce, and the only deal enabler, because there are things that they can't cover. And we can do that. We can enable that additional security for the simple reason that we are not Salesforce and we are not American, and our tool can be hosted anywhere. So yeah, there's differences between us and Salesforce Shield. Are we better? Yeah, we're different. We're different, and sometimes it's necessary to use the Eperi gateway. But there's a solid coexistence, and yeah, we like each other. All good there. Okay, I think that must be the last question. I'm sure there are a couple more. Please get in touch with us if there are any additional questions, but we've just ran out of time. So from my side, thank you again for your interest. Thank you again for your time. And we all hope to hear from you soon. Thank you very much, and goodbye.